right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome here to the Snake Sports Talk Show, wherever and however you may be watching and listening today. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook is where you can like and follow on all social media platforms. Also, subscribe on YouTube. The Spotlight Sports Network, the home of the Snake Sports Talk Show, and the Snake Sports Talk Show as well. And follow me on Spotify for all the latest podcast episodes. And to let everybody know, all the podcast episodes now, they are going to be submitted, and most of them are going to be recaps, and it'll get to the point where they will be the newly recent episodes, especially through the live stream. So first and foremost, I hope all of you guys are having a great weekend. Happy Sunday to all of you guys. It's a beautiful, beautiful morning here in Vegas. So excited to be here on the show this morning. I've got so much to talk about. I'm stacked. I am stacked. There has just been an awful lot. There's been an awful lot of things that have been going on in the sports world, and I can't wait to break each and every single one of them down. Let me just at least start with this segment here, because this one was definitely one of the biggest topics of the week. So we now have the richest athlete in sports. After a record-breaking deal, the Kansas City Chiefs have signed Patrick Mahomes to a 10-year contract. And everybody weighed in their thoughts on Patrick Mahomes. I did as well. I thought this was probably one of the most impressive deals that have been made in sports so far. And you have to think of, over the years, so many contracts that have been signed, come and gone, and how they've produced over the years. And this is my one thing that I look at with this Patrick Mahomes deal. And here's what's interesting. Okay, out of all the quarterbacks that we've watched all throughout the years, and I'm going to break it down in the AFC West, but I could tell you Patrick Mahomes is a once-in-a-generation type talent. There is nobody like him. There won't be a talent like his ever again in the NFL. You may argue that the talent we've seen was coming from Russell Wilson. We can argue it because when we watch Russell Wilson, he's fantastic. Doesn't get hurt. He's smart, and he's also the face of Seattle's franchise. I'm going to come out and say that for sure, because it's true. Russell Wilson, in all that he's done, is the face of Seattle. End of story. But Patrick Mahomes' case, and the way that I look at this, especially in the AFC West, he's one quarterback that to me kind of reminds me of John Elway. Think about over the years on all four of those teams in the AFC West. Now, they probably wouldn't have been the AFC West. It would have been something different. But think of it this way. Okay, all four of those teams. The Chargers were irrelevant. Okay, they had some good talent, but most of the time they were irrelevant. That was just how the franchise was. They didn't have exactly the special talent at any position, except they did have one of the best linebackers in the league, and that was Junior Seau. But most of the time, all throughout the years, they were irrelevant. It was a franchise that stayed in the middle. Didn't exactly get to a Super Bowl until Super Bowl 29. And then got themselves handed to by San Francisco. The Raiders. Okay, the Raiders over the years had some talents. Okay, and after the two Super Bowls, because we know that they had the first one with Jim Plunkett, but after the two Super Bowls, after that first one, the Raiders had been off and on. almost close to irrelevancy. And even though that there have been talents that come and gone, the Raiders couldn't even figure it out after after those 2 Super Bowls. And so the AFC was basically building. How about the Denver Broncos? Oh, wait. They did have a quarterback who kind of gave everybody in the AFC a hard time. That was John Elway. And John Elway, and here's what's funny about this, because my pops, as a diehard Raider fan, and in his generation of watching players, the only person that gave him a hard time was John Elway. But you have to think about it. It's a sign of respect, because John Elway, coming out of college in Stanford, was maybe one of the most accurate quarterbacks who comes into the league and goes into a Denver organization where Denver seemed irrelevant. But once John Elway came into the scene and everything ended up shaping around him, John Elway became that type of quarterback. He became that type of dangerous quarterback nobody in the AFC could beat or probably could have faced off against. And then there's the Kansas City Chiefs. After Super Bowl III, Kansas City was irrelevant. They had talents that were coming and going, not big-time special talents. And Kansas City kind of just, they laid low for years. And waiting until the opportunity where they would be, they would be a competitive franchise. Listen, I know Kansas City had Joe Montana at one point, but think about it. Joe Montana was already there toward the end of his career. And Joe Montana may have punched Kansas City back on the map as being a competitive team, but over the years, there were so much irrelevancies. And think of it this way. Yes, they've had a lot of really good players. Tony Gonzalez, Priest Holmes, Dante Hall. They had a lot of really good players. Derek Thomas. But the problem of it was Kansas City, over the years, they kept trying to figure this thing out. So when I look at this Patrick Mahomes deal, I almost think about it when Denver got John Elway and just made it such a tough time in the AFC. That's the only thing that I can think of with this deal. And here's where I'm going to break it down a little bit more. Outside of Tom Brady, which other quarterbacks in the first 2 full seasons has been able to accomplish to where he's already got a Super Bowl? I mean, Peyton Manning didn't do that. Drew Brees didn't do that. John Elway didn't do that. Only outside of Tom Brady has Patrick Mahomes been able to do that. And Patrick Mahomes has a ridiculous type of talent. A type of talent that is so difficult to explain. But it's a once-in-a-generation type talent, and that is something that we all come to respect. We all come to respect, and he's now the highest paid player in the league and even in sports as a whole. I am not upset about that. I'm not, because now I'm not sure how Kansas City might play this out, but think of it this way. The NFL has transformed into the point where quarterbacks are the most important thing because it's what builds your franchise. Okay, and you got to have the right head coach who works with this quarterback. And they have both. Andy Reid, who's probably one of the best playmakers in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes with ridiculous talent. This thing works for Kansas City. Now, the only question is, how long does most of the talent last? Because we know that they've got Tyreek Hill. We know that they've got Travis Kelce. We know that they've got a bunch of players on both offense and defense. And they drafted up a really good running back in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, offense, I may argue, sometimes come and go, and they reload all the time. But the only thing that I could tell you that has a longer longevity is who your franchise quarterback is. And Patrick Mahomes, and I'm going to do this as a best for last as well, but he's Kansas City football. I mean, he truly is. I can't think of any other player in Kansas City history except for Len Dawson, Tony Gonzalez, who is Kansas City football. Patrick Mahomes fits this. He fits the bill. Whenever I see Kansas City play, all I can think of now is Patrick Mahomes. And just the unbelievable things he does, the type of talent that he possesses, and his focus and his determination on the field. He, to me, is Kansas City football. And that's something that we will be watching for the next 10 years. And, I mean, he's an exciting talent to watch. I'm not going to lie. He's an exciting talent to watch. Yes, maybe in the AFC, he may be in the AFC, but either way, in the NFL as a whole, there's no talent like his. Listen, I like Lamar Jackson, but he's 0-2 in the playoffs. I still have yet to see a playoff win out of Lamar. But yet he also possesses a special ability in his talent. Josh Allen, I really do like in Buffalo, but Buffalo is just starting this thing up. They got their talents on both offense and defense. Now it's only just a matter of time until Josh Allen truly pops. There are a lot of different young quarterbacks out there who have different talents and I think possess a special ability for each of the franchises. But once Patrick Mahomes hit the scene, he was unbelievable right off the bat. And in the first 2 full seasons of his career, he's already gone to 2 straight playoffs, won an AFC championship game, and he's also won a Super Bowl. Outside of Tom Brady, I can't think of any other quarterback who has been able to do that in NFL history. That's why there's really not much for me to say in this deal. It makes perfect sense. It's the perfect relationship in Kansas City, in Andy Reid, and for Patrick Mahomes. It's going to be a hell of a show to watch for 10 years, but it'll be exciting. It always will be. Anytime when Patrick Mahomes, when you just see him with the football in his hands, you just know right off the bat what he's capable of doing. Let me shift to this because, the best news that we've heard now is Major League Baseball's back. We've got a schedule out. And I'm happy. I'm not thrilled that Major League Baseball is back, only because I think it just has gotten to the point where it took way too long for this negotiating deal between the owners, the players, the PA, and all of them to, at the very least, come to a decision and come to that conclusion. I've said this multiple times. I think they probably could have been, at the very least, played 80 or 90 games this season, but because of how long that it took, they weren't able to do it. They just weren't able to do it. So the first games that'll be coming up, because there are a lot of them. There are a lot of games that are coming up, and I'm excited for it because July 18th, that's when this thing starts. You got the Phillies and the Nationals and the Mets and the Yankees. And I can't wait for baseball itself to kick back up. Now, it will be interesting how they play everything out, but I think how they have this set, baseball is going to be fine. Baseball is going to be fine. It's not in the biggest of my concern. My only biggest concern to me personally would be basketball. But baseball, everybody is on the field. They are to a certain distance in each position, only except when you're at home plate, you have the catcher, the umpire, and the batter's box. That's what you have. But when I look at the schedule and I look at all these games, this is the one thing that has driven me to say this, that You got to have more primetime games. You got to give these fans a reason to plug themselves into the television and watch these games. Because I'll be honest with you, I've said this, I spoke this out, and I ranted about this in the past episodes about Major League Baseball, because I was just getting to the point where I was tired of it. I was tired of the back and forth bickering. I was tired of the nonstop stalling, and we have no plan. We have no direction of where Major League Baseball is going. But I've even said this, that baseball, what its popularities come from, because we love the Fall Classic. We love postseason baseball, and it's really, really good. And a lot of its ratings go up the roof every time when postseason baseball comes on, because nobody's going to end up watching 162 games a year. Nobody is. Unless, and here's the other thing, unless you have prime time or you have rivalry type games, interleague games also. And that's why the games that everybody loves to watch, they love to watch Battle of Chicago between the Cubs and the White Sox, North and South. They love to watch the Yankees against the Red Sox because it's an in-division rivalry. Okay. The other one is the Subway Series between the Yankees and Mets. They love interleague play like that. Dodgers and Giants, another one that's in division, and both those teams don't really like each other that much. And then there's Yankees-Dodgers, because it's two of the most historic franchises, probably one of the most expensive franchises to clash. Everybody loves that. Those, to me, are prime time games that glues everybody's eyes to the television, because, hey, two historic franchises going against each other, why not? We'll watch it. Or how about rivalry games? Oh, they really don't like each other. Oh, I like this. I like to see how this pans out. But I could tell you, I mean, Major League Baseball in a shortened season like this now, it's 60 games. So the whole idea is now 40 of those games will be in divisions, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with it being in divisions, because at least all these teams can focus in on their divisions. How many times, and this is what's interesting, how many times do you think that the Angels focus more on in divisions? I mean, look at their division in the AL West. The Astros, we know, they've been competitive. The A's are getting competitive. The Texas Rangers, now they may need some pitching help, but even their offense is getting better. And Seattle's just kind of on low end of the totem pole. But the Angels, they got to figure this thing out. You've got a lineup, but your pitching outside of Shohei Ohtani is not strong enough. Okay, and the AL West is getting competitive. There are other divisions in baseball that are getting competitive. They are. And especially in a 60-game season, because I'll tell you this, 60 games does go by super fast. And a lot of these teams who now have an edge, who now may actually have a shot, that's the Angels, that's the Phillies, that's the White Sox. And you know what? Surprisingly, Toronto would. Almost lots of these teams who we didn't really anticipate in a 162-game season would have ever even had a shot. That's my pure honesty. As I've said, Angels have starting rotation issues. The Padres, they need more pitching. They've got some good offense, but they need more pitching. Look, I like Mike Paddock, but outside of him, I need a little more than that. The White Sox, I think, have young talent, and they're going to be the second best team in the AL Central. But, I mean, it's going to be a long road for them. And there are a bunch of other teams who I like where their talent is going, but I still need a little bit more than that. So that's why I think that this 60-game season goes by fast, and there's no excuses for all 30 clubs. Everybody's getting a break. Everybody is getting a break. And I know for the Yankees, it's unfortunate because now Masahiro Tanaka had taken a liner to the head, and now he's injured. He's resting up, and that's something that's kind of unfortunate for the Yankees. But still, there's no excuses now for the Yankees. Everybody's healthy outside of Tanaka. Everyone's healthy. And this is now where a lot of these players, and I know that there are some players too that are also opting out. Now, it's understandable. It's understandable, and I'm going to get into it a little bit later on. But this is where now there's no excuses for either club. 60 games goes by fast. 40 in division games, 20 of them, which are mixtures of interleagues and some primetime games. That's it. And that's all within the bubble. And so it'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out. But Major League Baseball and all these schedules, that's why that I pushed for it. Major League Baseball needs to make it more interesting. If you get more primetime games, you get more rivalry games, or if you get more of those interleague games that everybody loves to watch, and at the same time, you have a slogan, let the kids play. Why are we not doing that? Let the kids show off their cleats. Let them show off their stylish gloves. Let them show off these new unis, because isn't that what the NFL too is king for? Isn't that what the NBA all the time they are known for? Or how about hockey? When you've got a third sweater that comes out stylish, looks great. I mean, let's make it interesting. We don't have to change the tradition. We're only just making it better. Coming up next, I'm going to be talking a little bit more on the NHL, because there are a few things that we're going to break down from here as far as the two hub cities in Edmonton and Toronto. So all of it will be in Canada, and I think it benefits for the players. I'll explain why. And the other thing of it is college football. This is where I'm going to have my big take on this, because college football now is going to play more in-conference games. I'm not mad about that. And I know it's upsetting that there are some out-of-conference games that we won't even get to see this year. But I'm going to break down all of that coming up next here on the Snake Sports Talk Show. All right, folks, if you are just tuning in here, welcome back to the Snake Sports Talk Show. Man, I had a lot to say there about Major League Baseball, but I will tell you this. I mean, again, I've grown up a baseball fan, and the fact that it's taken that long, but at the same time, there's still some adjustments that need to be made in the league, and because a lot of people, we know that there are complications with the commissioner, and I've had my thoughts, but at the end of the day, there's only so much that Major League Baseball really can do up to this point. And I'm only just being a voice of reason. I'm not taking sides. I'm not the type of person. I'd much rather be a balancer and be a voice of reason. That's what the show is all about. Voicing of opinions, voices of reason, and giving everybody a platform really to kind of weigh in on every single opinion on every topic. So last night was so much fun. Last night was UFC 251 on Fight Island on Yas Island in Abu Dhabi. I think it went really, really well. Worked out greatly. And the fight cards I thought were great. Rose Namajunas got her redemption against Jessica Andrade, and she looked poised. She looked really, really good last night in the octagon. Also, Peter Yan now is the new bantamweight champion after defeating Jose Aldo. And I'll be honest, I think it's up to the point now that Jose Aldo looks like he's right. Like he looked like he was ready for retirement. By the time you got to rounds 3 through 5, he was getting slower. And Peter Yan still had power, and he still had stamina enough to keep going. But as far as for Jose Aldo, it slowed down. It wasn't working all as much. And I think it's just to the point he may be ready for retirement. And I really do believe he should. This is just honest opinion. Alexander Volkanovski remains the champion after defeating Max Holloway. I'll argue this. I mean, I looked at Max Holloway and how he strategized his fight style against Volkanovski, and I thought Holloway had an edge. I really, truly thought Max Holloway had some sort of edge against him, but apparently Volkanovski strengthened it out. He toughened it out by rounds 4 and 5 and still remains the champion. And then finally, the big main card, which was the last championship of the night, that was Kamaru Usman against Jorge Masvidal. And I'll be honest with you. I honestly went with Masvidal, and I knew it was going to go all 5 rounds. It was going to end up going the distance. But here's the thing. I looked at it as unanimous decision because, number one, Kamaru Usman does not go down without a fight. And Usman, I thought, was very technical. I thought he was, he was very, very strategic of his fights. And he's a strong grappler. That's the type of fighter that he is. Masvidal, you get caught in either one of his punches, and they're not easy ones. These are tough ones. These are the ones that really shake you up. I thought Usman did a great job strategizing it, seeing it coming right before his eyes. And now Usman has 12 straight UFC wins, which now ties George St. Pierre of the record. And Kamaru Usman, I guarantee you, is going to be shooting for 13. And I loved watching GSP. I loved watching him over the years in the UFC, and I thought it was very impressive in last night's fight. And it actually went very smoothly. And you're playing, you're fighting in Fight Island. The viewing rates were going up, and it was actually perfect. Dana White, the president of UFC, pulled this thing off beautifully, and I can't wait for the next Fight Island fight to come up soon. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it worked out perfectly for the UFC, and I think it's just now another big-time promotion that they'll have in the near future. I mean, I know it's in a time of a series of unfortunate events here in the world that I thought they executed beautifully. 3 title fights there. All three of them I thought were very, very good. They were very entertaining to watch. Even for the first two fights before those title fights were really, really good. So there was a lot of expectations we can expect from the UFC, but I thought it was fantastic last night. So let me go ahead and break this down, because college football, and I'll tell you this, in the collegiate sports, because a lot of changes have been happening in the past couple days. The Ivy League schools, they're canceling their programs, which is a big deal. And yet, in the Ivy League schools, I'll be honest, this is a double-edged sword. Even though that they're canceling their sport programs, these are smart, very highly and well-educated schools. I mean, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, lots of these Ivy League schools, they're very, very smart students, very, very smart people. Especially in a time of uncertainty, you got to have people who are willing to think outside the box, and even for innovative people who may just give us a really, really good idea on how we can suppress this virus, how we can really cope with it. You know, the more down the stretch that we come to the conclusion we finally found a cure for this virus, you got to have innovative people. And I thought the Ivy League schools, I thought it was a lot of people are kind of disappointed that the sport's canceled, but yet smart people who think outside the box think it was a good idea, because Ivy League schools are very, very smart people, very smart, very intelligent people. These are the kind of ones these are the people that innovate society. And so, but here's one thing I will get into, because the Big Ten announced that they were going to end up playing in conference games. And the Big 12 and the Pac-12, they're following it as well. And I'm guarantee you that the SEC will as well. But let me just look at this from a perspective about college football, because I'll be honest with you, over the years on college football, we've had way too many cupcake breaks. I'm sick of it. And this is the kind of thing, and listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, because why would Alabama have so many cupcake games in their schedules when they're playing teams like Troy or Bowling Green or and they're just getting easy blown out wins all throughout their schedule before they even face whether it's out of conference or it's in conference games in the SEC. Like I ranted about it in the past. I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's absurd. So I'm just going to break a few things down for you that I think would make college football more interesting, more exciting, and I think also, too, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. None. Because this is the type of thing that college football is very exciting. And yes, I understand with some of the smaller programs, but let me be honest with you. Very small percentage of small college football programs are actually very competitive. I mean, I'll take, for instance, UCF. I mean, when their coach, when it was Frost that was their coach, I thought he was very, very competitive. He was a very competitive coach, and he definitely shaped up that program. Then you also look at South Florida. There were some there, the coaching staff up over there I thought was very competitive, maybe not to the extent as some of these power conferences, but they were very competitive. There are some programs in college football that I would consider very, very competitive, but not all of them, because a lot of these smaller programs, they're still trying to figure this thing out. And it's just getting too difficult because of just the level of competition that's being played. All right. And so here's where I'll break this down. Okay. Number one, you got to play at least 10 in-conference games. Oh, I hate to burst your bubble, SEC, but I don't want to end up seeing Alabama, LSU, or Georgia, for all that matter, plays so many of these cupcake games because it's like they're getting a free pass in the schedule. And no. You really want to get used to your conference, you got to play those 10 in-conference games. Okay? Because at least Alabama, that's why everybody was ranting and raving, and they were excited about LSU's run. Why? Because LSU got better. They got stronger. Coach O was having the best year of his life. And Joe Burrow put up unbelievable numbers as a college player. And it really kind of, it started to ruffle feathers with Alabama. And look, outside of those three colleges, but then you look at Florida. You also look at South Carolina and Missouri and all these other SEC teams. At least in the SEC, lots of these programs now can get competitive because they're used to their own conference. They hardly play, each other in their own conferences. So why is it Alabama usually gets 4 cupcake games in their schedules? I don't get it. That's the one thing that has bothered a lot of people because, look, I'm not taking anything away from Nick Saban, but I get sick and tired of watching all these cupcake games where they're getting blown out by 70 points and you're playing teams like Western Kentucky. Are you kidding me? No more of that. Okay. The second thing, every college team gets 1 cupcake game. That's it. Not 2, not 3, not 4. 1 Alabama, 1 LSU, 1 Ohio State. Okay. 1 cupcake game is more than enough for me. Okay. And yeah, it may make a day for some of these, for the smaller college football programs. Okay, it may make their day because of the fact that they're facing against one of the more prestigious college football programs in America. But do they really have the shots of beating these teams? Very, 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 very small percentage do some of these small programs do. But only 1 cupcake is more than enough for me. Okay, I'm not going to go and get 3, 4 more in the schedule because where's really the fairness in that? Because I look at some of these AP polls and it's ridiculous. And because I look at some of these college programs, and if they're not facing against some of the toughest programs, whether it's in their conference or and it's sad to say that we won't see them outside their conferences because we would love to see the matchup between Alabama and USC, and and Alabama and Oregon. We'd love to see all of those out of conference games, but unfortunately, that's just the way that it's going to be. That's it. Okay, so 10 in conference games, 1 cupcake game, because think of it this way: that's like your bye week. You get a break. Okay, you face some of these small programs, you blow them out by 60, 70 points, and you get a break. Every college program gets a break. All right? But I don't want numerous amounts of breaks because where is the fairness in that? 3, everybody needs to be in their own. It needs to be in their they need to be suited in their own conferences, okay? Like, for example, Nebraska. They don't fit that conference. Bring them back. Okay, they got to play more Texas schools. They got to end up playing within their region because at least scouts, parents, everybody can go and drive and watch the games. Okay, that strengthens their conferences. And the other thing, Notre Dame, no more. No more independents, okay? No more independent. BYU, no more independent either. All right? Get into a conference. I mean, how many times over the years have we seen Notre Dame, which, again, I'm not taking anything away from that. They're a really good football program. But how many times over the years have we seen Notre Dame in their own independent conference win games, but yet they're not even in a strengthened conference whatsoever? I feel like if Notre Dame does, then things would be interesting. And I think the program strengthens itself because at that point, they have more programs in their conference that are tough, that are competitive, and gives Notre Dame a little bit more work. And it also strengthens a lot of just the coaching style, the coaching method, and the players. It strengthens all those components. Players are more excited to face against competitive teams in their own conferences. Think about it in the NFL, because I'm sure, the NFL faces twice in their own division teams that are in their division. They face them twice a year, and they get used to their own division. Okay, and trust me, if you think in-division records don't matter, yeah, it kind of does in some ways, because you've got teams in your own division that are getting better, that are getting stronger. Okay, SEC, LSU this past year got better and got stronger. Okay, Georgia was pretty much middle of the pack. Okay, Georgia was very much middle in the pack. There were a couple of games that they whiffed on, but they still are competitive. How about the Big Ten? Ohio State. Okay, they're probably one of the best, Big Ten conference programs in America. Outside of that, then you got Michigan. And probably right after them, you got Michigan State. But that's about it. Everybody in the Big Ten needs to get better. Or how about the Big 12? Oklahoma, Texas. All those programs got to get better. And I even said this earlier when I talked with a really, really good colleague of mine about the Pac-12. Talked about USC. But USC, Oregon, parts of me wants to say Washington. All these programs got to be stronger, and they got to get better in their own conferences. You can't just throw in 3-4 cupcake games and just think, oh, their record's going to get... No. That's too much. One is more than enough for me. And even for teams, Notre Dame, BYU, get into a conference. Okay, get into a conference that makes sense, a conference that is competitive to where Notre Dame can now show their skills on all cylinders. No more of this independent stuff. All right? And finally, leave the college football playoffs alone. 4 teams is fine. 4 teams is fine with me. And you've got 12 of those bowl games that make sense. A lot of these, there are not a lot of people that watch all of these other, small bowl games that don't matter. Okay? And all of these small programs, I hate bursting all of their bubbles. But that's where you got to get better and stronger in your program. You got to get better in your in your recruiting methods. If you want to be a program that's very competitive, where you got to have the right recruiters, you got to have the right head coach, you got to have the right play style, and you got to have the right players. Okay, and it's not easy for someone, because a lot of these kids, the second they come out of high school, they want to go into these big time programs. Lots of them want to go to Ohio State. Lots of them want to go to LSU or Alabama. Very rare do some of them want to go to USC, but that's where USC has to make the adjustment to it. But 4 teams in the playoffs is more than enough, and you got 12 bowl games that matter. Okay, 12 bowl games that actually make sense, and they matter. All right? Because one of them, honestly, the Vegas Bowl, who doesn't love to play in Vegas? Okay, and the Vegas Bowl is going to be played in Allegiant Stadium. The second that the Raiders end up touching the field and they get ready for the 2020 season, people are going to look at this thing. UNLV, and we know that they're a small program, but UNLV is going to look at this thing and they're going to go, wow, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful, beautiful field. I'd love to play here. But that's when you have the Vegas Bowl and programs want to play in Vegas. It's beautiful. Yeah, it gets a little hot, but it's beautiful time of year. And it's a new field, and it's a new fresh scenery. But that's it. Okay? So that's what I'm narrowing down. Okay, 10 in-conference games, 1 cupcake, 4 college football playoff teams. Okay, and there's 12 bowl games. Okay, there's 12 bowl games. And the 2 that are independent, BYU and Notre Dame, go and find a conference. Because at least it'll make the programs better, it'll make them stronger, and it'll make them more competitive. And it will make sense in the college football realm. Because I am tired of watching Alabama 4, if not close to 5 times of the schedule where they're playing cupcake programs. I'm tired of that. Because Alabama, listen, we know how great Nick Saban is, but you can't make your legacy any greater if you're playing all these cupcake programs. Get competitive. How are these kids going to end up strengthening themselves, especially with the way that the NFL is shifting? I'm being serious about this because this would literally be the last time I would ever see this on college football. Okay, and college football is so much fun to watch, but you can't be excited about it every time when they play a cupcake program. Okay, these programs, yeah, they got to play in their levels and their style of play too. But in order to really get your program better, you got to make the right moves. You got to make the right moves and you got to fix the right components just to make it work. But that's just my rant and rave on college football. And again, I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but these are just suggestions. Think about it. Try it. I guarantee you that if Notre Dame found a conference, they'd be very competitive. Now, they may lose some, but at least they're not independent anymore. They have an idea of what the competitive level is, because I love watching it every time when they're playing out of conferences and they're playing some of these big-time conference programs. Okay, like Notre Dame, Ohio State, Notre Dame against Alabama, Notre Dame against LSU, Notre Dame against USC. Okay, I love watching games like that. But in order to really kind of be more competitive, you got to be in a stronger conference. So no more of that. No more of that independent stuff. All right? Give it the program. I'm fine with them playing in conference. I have no issues with it whatsoever. But they just need it. This is just something that's only going to make the college football world better when we have it. So, be taking a break, but I will return here in just a moment here on the Snake Sports Talk Show. Whew, I hope you guys all loved my take on college football, because I just, after I just looked at it a couple of times, again, I don't bring this towards just one program. I'm not here to just pick on Alabama, but I'm just like, seriously, if this is just one that we know that Alabama is such a tough football program, like, imagine how that would be with other programs. Imagine that if other programs were to be playing the same way, would just be, working the same way with all these cupcake games, it would be ridiculous. Then it would be, what is the point of that? And they're not playing so much in conference games, because I want all of these teams to, I want all these programs to be playing at their own colleges. I want them to start playing more in their own colleges and in their own conferences. It makes perfect, valid sense. And that's just my take on it. All these programs are going to get better if they play more of their in-conference programs. That's it. Everybody else, they're going to have to go through the same exact thing. And all these small programs, they're going to have to figure it out one way or another. And I get it. Like, it makes their days whenever they play some of these big time programs that you never thought you face. It makes everyone's day, but it shouldn't always be like 3-4 in their schedule, because really, where's the competitive side for lots of these big time programs? There isn't, and all of them, it's like it's their sneaky way in, easy way into it. And just doesn't make sense to me. It just really, really doesn't make sense to me. So we're going to be taking another break, but hour 2 is coming up next. And what I'll be talking about the NHL hub cities and Edmonton and Toronto. I think this is going to be really, really good. I am so excited for the Stanley Cup playoffs to finally be starting. We have a schedule out, and I'm going to break down all of those games that are be coming up, because we have the qualifiers. I know I spoke about it before, and I gave my takes on both teams in the Eastern and Western Conference. But I'm going to break it down at least a little bit more thoroughly in these qualifiers, and I think this is going to be so much fun. You guys don't want to end up missing that. Snake Sports Talk Show, hour 2 coming up next. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hour 2 here. We are live in the Snake Sports Talk Show here in Las Vegas, wherever and however you may be watching and listening today. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook is where you can like and follow me on all social media platforms. Also, subscribe to the Spotlight Sports Network, the home of the Snake Sports Talk Show, and the Snake Sports Talk Show as well. And follow me on Spotify. I'm getting all the podcast episodes back. I'm super excited about it. And, and like I said, it was a lot of planning. It was a lot of, adjustments here and there. But I'm very excited. I'm very glad to be able to get the podcast back up and running. I'll be honest with you. It's a lot of work. It's an awful lot of work. But I'm very excited to finally have it back. So definitely check it out on Spotify. I will have a couple of recaps of some shows. So there'll be recaps, but eventually it'll get to the point where there will be brand new, recent episodes, especially that come from the live stream. So you guys don't want to end up missing that. Check it out. And of course, they're everywhere. There's Spotify. There's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. All sorts of different podcasts you guys can listen to on the go. Download on your smartphone, or definitely look at it on your laptop, any device that you have. Just so that way, then you got the Snake Sports Talk Show. You take it wherever you want, and just listen in. So I'm really excited. This is where I'm going to segue here, into the NHL. So this is where I'm excited about this. So we have the hub cities, Edmonton, and Toronto. And each of them, and both of these work. Because if you think about it, Canada is very cold. Now, I'm not saying it's super, super cold, but it's cold enough where the ice maintains. And it's a good thing. Because you got to have ice in order to play hockey. You got to have something that's a cold weather temperature that maintains. So I think this is definitely going to work for lots of these teams and for these players and for these coaches. And they've also announced a lot of these hotel rooms that each of these teams will be staying at. So they'll be staying remotely at a couple of different hotel rooms, which I think is great. It's smart. And each of them usually, I think if I had seen right, they hold up about 5 different teams. So that works. Works for me. Now, there have only been about a couple of players who have opted out. And that's understandable. We get it. And I'll go into a little bit more further down the segment here in just a moment. But at least for this will work. Everybody is in the bubble now in Canada. Yes, it's unfortunate that we don't get to see it in the U.S. because there were a couple of good remote places. Detroit, Michigan, St. Paul, Minnesota. There would have been a bunch of locations where we would have been able to watch hockey in the States. But because Canada is so big on hockey, I mean, outside of baseball and outside of, the Toronto Raptors, their hockey is good. And I think this is actually giving Canada a little bit more of a boost as they're getting into the Stanley Cup playoffs, because Montreal, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, Toronto, Vancouver, all these Canadian teams now. And I had even seen something in a recent history. No Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup since Montreal did it in 1993. Not one. Since then, the U.S. has gotten competitive. Lots of other teams have gotten competitive. And only time will tell if Canada will shine again. But Canada's always been big on hockey. It's always been their big-time sport. There are other international countries as well that have been big on hockey. I mean, Russia, for one. There's so many of them. But this is good, though. This is a good thing for hockey. Season's done, wrapped up. We're in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And now we've got these qualifiers. We have the qualifier schedule. I'll bring this up here in a second. But I like this. You now have the Stanley Cup qualifiers, and this is kind of how everything is playing out. So in the qualifiers, as I will reread them again, you have Calgary against Winnipeg, Nashville against Arizona, Edmonton against Chicago, Vancouver against Minnesota, Toronto against Columbus, Carolina against the Rangers, Penguins against the Canadiens, and then the Islanders against Florida. And then the round-robin teams in the Western Conference are St. Louis, Colorado, Vegas, and Dallas. In the East, it's Boston, Washington, Tampa, and Philly. And so best of 5 is what these qualifiers will be. After that, then that's when they play the round-robin teams. And there are about a couple of round-robin teams here who I think are going to be very competitive. And they're well-rested. Actually, scratch that. Everybody is well-rested. Because we know that there were injuries for certain players that they've suffered during the season. And so, so it's worked out beautifully. It's worked out perfectly to the extent that, now, it's going to get competitive. And I've already made my point on a couple of teams because I look at some of them and I think there are some who I think are going to be very competitive out of this thing, whether it's in the qualifiers or whether they just come out of the round robin and they're red hot right off the bat. But there are a lot of competitive teams out there. Now, I understand with the unfortunate series of events with this COVID-19 and with all of these rules and regulations, we get that. But still, most of these teams are very competitive. Most of these teams are very competitive. Now, there are some that I don't think are going to be as competitive. They may get to a certain extent, but then in the end, they might get burnt out pretty quickly. They might get burnt out quick. And I made my point, and I still got one thing on the line. I mean, the Edmonton and Chicago game, I still think Chicago may upset Edmonton. I'll be honest with you. And they also announced that Mike Green, their defenseman, has opted out of the comeback season. And that might take a toll on the defense, but it is understandable for so many reasons. But that's something that Edmonton now has to really kind of thoroughly look at from here. And again, I'm hoping that all of this goes through well. I mean, not just in hockey, but in so many different sports. Because even though that we'd love to have sports back, there are still health concerns. There are still things that are uncertain that we have no knowledge about. And it's understandable. And I'm not gonna be the person to fight it, because there's no point for me. There's no point for me having to give out those types of thoughts on what could be better, what could be efficient. It's not, because everything changes over time. It just happens. But again, I do like this deal. I do like the plan, and I think that this is going to work out smoothly. I think with the hotel planning and the facilities and all sorts of places, it's going to work out just fine. Don't panic. I think it's going to end up working out just fine. I'm going to segue to this because a lot of players have decided to opt it out. Now, there are so many players, both in all different bodies of sports. Okay. We know Avery Bradley, he opted out, but he opted out in his mind for the right reason. And I respect that. And one of the big things that was a big topic, especially in baseball, was Buster Posey. Buster Posey is going to be expecting twins. And so I think it was the right move for Buster to make that, because I'll be honest with you, I love Buster Posey. I'd love to have an interview with him one day, just getting the chance to meet him, because such a down-to-earth, very, very just a very nice guy. Very nice guy. Great clubhouse chemistry. And this is a guy who is a 3-time World Series champion. And you don't really hear a whole lot about Buster. But the fact that he came out, opting out of the season, it's a classy move, because it really does show you in life what the main importances are. And this is something that I have been saying now for the past couple of episodes. If you want to play for the sport, play hard, have fun. That's mostly what it's all about. Because in the end, we know that in sports like this, in the sports realm, it's politics. We know that also too, that there's money involved. There's contracts. I get all that. But at the end of the day, it's something that we've all played as kids, which made us feel good, which made us boost our confidence. And at the same time, it was a growth development when it came to sports. For me personally in my life, baseball has been a growth development for me because it made me learn a lot more about life, which is why I'll never miss a pitch. I'll never miss a game. Baseball's life for me. It teaches me a lot about life in some of the aspects of life people don't even think about. That's why I mentioned before about the Ivy Leagues, about smart people, very innovative people who think outside the box. I turn around and I'm looking, anytime that I'm out in public, and I hardly do go out in public sometimes, because in matters of uncertainties, all I got to do is just get my stuff. I'm gone. I'm back home. I really got nothing else to worry about. But that's the life I choose to live. And so when stuff like this hits the fan, you have to think about what is the biggest importance in your life. And I see this from a lot of players. I see this from Buster Posey. I see this from Avery Bradley. I see this from a lot of players. Nick Markakis opted out. And these are players who I very much respect and I think understand the levels of uncertainty, but also understand the responsibilities and what is most important in life. Because at the end of the day, sports itself is sports. And yes, it is a business type aspect. But at the same time, do any of you remember when you were a kid and you were playing sports, you were playing something that was, an activity to you, and it helped you grow? You made friends, you communicated, you learned a lot about life. That's in any sport, whether it's baseball, basketball, football, hockey, or any other sport that's out. Like, my parents wanted me to do lacrosse. I never thought about it in my head, but even when I ended up watching the sport, I was like, wow, this is interesting. And I would think hockey players during the off season, they'd probably go and play a little bit of, some pickup games and exhibition games in lacrosse, because it's basically field hockey. You just don't have skates on. You're in padding, and it's somewhat of similar aspect. Or how about tennis? Baseball players, I'll be honest with you, when I was in high school, baseball players, after off seasons, they all went and played tennis, because in tennis, it's the same mechanics. You're using everything from the ground up. That's all in your lower body. That's where all of it is coming from. You're moving. And it's like, for infielders, it works. It really does. It works on their awarenesses. It works on everything. Another thing, like, my parents wanted me to play golf. Over the years when I was growing up as a kid, golf to me was natural. It was natural, calming, relaxing. And when my real father, when we ended up going to the driving ranges when I was growing up as a kid, the only thing I learned was not just to grip it and rip it, but to basically have a style and a smoother swing. The ones that, like, you knew you got all of it. You knew you got all of the ball, and the yardage just carrying. That's always the fun part whenever you go to the driving ranges, or whenever you go and you're playing 18 holes with some friends, and I do remember those good old days. It was with my real dad. It was with my pops. It was with a lot of people. And I miss those times. There are times I've been saying it all the time that I want to end up going back and getting back into golf. But besides all of that, because of all these uncertainties in the world today, I mean, look, Vegas, the governor issued a shutdown of all of the bars. for the second time now. And I feel for a lot of people that are here in the bar industry. I feel for a lot of them. I'm not sure what may happen in the next couple of months or so, but I hope that each of them are all safe, healthy, but they're also maintaining at least the best way possible, because I do have friends of mine that have families. They have families, they got kids, and when they work in industries like this is what helps them to keep a roof over their head. This is also what helps them to put food on the table. So it was an unfortunate thing, but if there's any way to try to just slow this virus down, I mean, that's the call. I have my own personal opinion. I'm not too fond of it, but the call is the call. There's nothing really that, you can do or you could say as much except have voices of opinions, but that's it. There's not much that can happen. What's initiated is done. But in the midst of all of this, I respect the players who opt out. Now, there are some players that I do know that are opting out, but yet are healthy. There's nothing really if you got nothing to do and you're opting out, what's the point of it? Because it's a team aspect. If you got nothing to do, then even go play. People will encourage you, just go play. Just go have fun. But of course, remember, in life, the choices you make, there are always consequences in the end. And those are not the consequences that are there to discourage us. They're there to teach us. They're there to build us in every way possible. Because if you don't learn from there, what are you basically learning? And what is the purpose? All throughout this time, I've been living and learning, because I don't know what could happen in the next couple months. I don't know what could break out at some point soon, but I'm hoping that there are some positivities throughout this. We get some sort of positive news. And so, hopefully, and I'm happy that sports is back, and I hope that things go smoothly. I'm not trying to be the guy that, is trying to talk down on sports or, make it worse. I'm not going to do that, because I'm a sports talk guy. I talk about sports. I love sports. And that's what this platform and this network is all about. And I'm excited for it. And I hope that all the players are safe and healthy, and hope we get back to some sort of normalcy from here. But coming up next, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about on the NFL, because I think that there are some things we might catch in the NFL that I think will be interesting for the next season. And I know that some of the facilities, there are some facilities that aren't open, and then there are some facilities that are up and running. And all these teams, they're getting ready. They're starting their practices, and we'll see exactly how everything shapes up. But I'll be talking a little bit about that coming up next. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to the Snake Sports Talk Show. So glad to have you all back here again, here in hour two. It's kind of interesting, and I wanted to break this down a little bit more. But I had just gotten this update, and this is from one of the really good TSN broadcasters here. They're a network out in Canada. They produce everything that's all Canadian sports and athletes and so much more. Craig Button, one of the TSN broadcasters, ended up coming out and saying, because, as I mentioned before about the NHL hub cities and with all the qualifiers, because one game in particular, the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Columbus Blue Jackets, Craig Button believes, and this is just from his saying, he does not believe the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to make it past the qualifiers. That's his big take. Now, I said this when I ended up breaking down all these qualifiers and all the teams. When I broke this all down, I've said this about Toronto. Toronto is a real good team. There's no denying it. But there are some problems to Toronto that, just does not add up. Because number one, they went forwards deep. What do I mean by that? They ended up paying for a lot of their forwards. One of them being Austin Matthews, one of their star forwards in the franchise. And he's not the captain. So they paid for Austin Matthews. They paid a year ago for John Tavares. They paid William Nylander, and he held out. And then also who held out was Mitch Marner. And they paid him. And there are all these forwards that they still have. Andreas Johnson, Kasper Kapanen. They're forwards deep. And they spent all their money on some of their big-time forwards. But the one thing that concerns me is the goaltending and the defense. Now, there are some real good defenders like Jake Muzzin and Tyson Barrie and Morgan Riley. Not going to take anything away from them. But the goaltending for Toronto with Frederik Andersen, I may make an argument, doesn't seem all legitimate. If you had seen Toronto in the last 3 years, Toronto had been stuck with the same franchise in the playoffs. That was the Boston Bruins. And the Bruins have constantly had their number every time. And Toronto came in this year, and this is when they started out with Mike Babcock before he ended up getting fired. Okay, the team seemed like they were on a roll. But then eventually, things just started to kind of die down. Nobody knew what the problem was. So Mike Babcock got fired. And listen, I respect Mike Babcock in certain ways. As a head coach, he was very competitive. Everybody remembers him from the Detroit years. Really, really good head coach. And then in comes Sheldon Keefe, hoping that would be a fire starter. And it was, but then you get beat by a backup goaltender in Carolina. There were so many things that were falling apart. And that was some of the inconsistencies that the Toronto Maple Leafs are facing. And as I broke this down, I think this is going to go the distance in all 5 games in the qualifiers between Toronto and Columbus. The only reason why, and I gave this my point, because Toronto has a chip on their shoulder. Toronto went forwards deep. And this is something where Toronto now needs to make it happen. Because once again, if they ended up losing this, expect players to get moved. Because then they have to go back into the blueprint and reconstruct and reconfigure what they need to do with this team. And I can tell you this, whatever happens with Frederik Andersen, is probably going to end up pinpointing the problem. Because there were a bunch of goaltenders that I've seen this year that have struggled big time. Braden Holtby during the season didn't look like himself. And Columbus revamped at the goaltender position after Eunice Korpisalo. He maintained as much as he could, but then once Elvis Merzlikins came in, Columbus looked a lot like a competitive team. Now, not competitive to the extent where they may even go further into the playoffs, but they're a team I don't sleep on. And John Tortorella has this thing all mapped out. But in this case, with Toronto and Columbus, I only say it because Columbus, we know Seth Jones is out. Seth Jones is out with an injury. But Zach Werenski, there are a couple of other real good forwards I do like. But as far as talent and skill level, they've got skill. They got some talent, but there still needs to be more built. Because Columbus last year, they worked all through the trade deadline while they still had Artemi Panarin. They got Matt Duchene from Ottawa, and they got Ryan Dzingel. They had also gotten at least a couple of real good players that could help to boost up because Columbus knew what they were getting themselves into and eventually was going to blow up. Now, it wasn't going to be the extent where they had to ship out a bunch of players like what happened with Ottawa, but Elvis Merzlikins, I didn't see this kid coming, and he's very competitive. And Zach Werenski, I said this, he's an under-the-radar type player at defense that is very competitive, regardless if Seth Jones is playing or not. He's a really, really good kid, young kid, still has a lot to grow in this league, but he's at the point where he could be a very valuable defenseman. And I mentioned that even during the free agency, is somebody that, some of these competitive teams, if they need more defense and they need to bolster up, is somebody to look at. But that is a strong take. Knowing Toronto might not make that first round qualifier and would get eliminated easily, that's a strong take. It's a strong take indeed. But at the end of the day, again, Toronto's coming in with this chip on their shoulder. I've mentioned this before. I think it's going to go all the way to the distance in all 5 games, but I think Toronto might have the last laugh, but it will not be as easy as it comes. And that is something Toronto has to be prepared for, because you also have to think about these teams in the round robin in the East. Tampa, Boston, Washington, Philadelphia. They are all very competitive teams. Toronto, you want to start to get competitive and you want to start to be a better franchise. You have to be prepared for these things. The last couple of seasons, they've lucked out against Boston. They haven't played well. And it was always to the distance with them. Always to the distance with the Bruins. And Boston got the last laugh. And this is something now that Toronto, they paid their forwards big-time top dollar money. And if this happens, where Columbus knocks them out in the qualifiers, it's not going to be good for the franchise. Not going to be good for the franchise. And expect a lot of these forwards to get moved. It won't be Austin Matthews. It won't be John Tavares. But if you're looking at these young players like William Nylander and Mitch Marner, and maybe about a couple, because I even mentioned about Kasperi Kapanen being a guy that would be trade bait for certain teams, but even he didn't get moved. And I was very surprised at that. And I'm not sure what's in the cards for Toronto moving forward, but if this happens, it's not going to be great. Time now for the hot press. Man, we just had a lot of interesting news and everything else that we've been going around. So So the Chicago White Sox pitching coach seems to be concerned about their up-and-coming star right-hander Michael Kopech. He's decided to opt out of the 2020 season. Kopech, the 24-year-old, he missed the entire 2019 season after recovering from Tommy John surgery and was expected to contend for Chicago's starting rotation. He publicly discussed about his anxiety and his depression thing, and this is what the pitching coach ended up mentioning. This was Don Cooper. This is what he mentioned about Kopech. I don't know what is going on with Michael, but I know he deals with some anxiety and depression. And my thought is, I sure hope he's okay. And I hope he gets to where he needs to be, where he's feeling good and wants to come back, because we will welcome him back with open arms. So, I've said this about Chicago. I'm very excited about what the future that it holds for the Chicago White Sox, because I think that they're in a position where they got a lot of young talent, Michael Kopech being one of them, Lucas Giolito, Ronaldo Lopez, Yohan Moncada, Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez, Jose Abreu. The list goes on with all this talent. And this is kind of scary. But these are also numerous players that I've also seen too who have dealt with this type of thing. And let me just tell you this from personal experiences. It's difficult. It's tough. And I hope the same exact thing like pitching coach Don Cooper. I hope that Michael Kopech goes through this and copes through this well, because it's not easy for everyone. It is not. And I'll tell you this, when the shutdown happened, lots and lots of people were not sure how they were going to end up coping with it. And it was a lot of stress-related build, and there was a lot of different things that have been going around. Especially in my experience, it has opened my eyes to so many things. And it seemed like at first it was a very, very dark place. But in the end, the more and more you surround yourself with the best people possible, gives you a positive uplift, keeps your head up, and keeps you motivated, I think it's the best thing possible. So I do wish the absolute best for Michael Kopech, and I hope that he copes through this well, because it's not easy. It's not easy at all. It's scary, but doesn't mean that we're all alone in this. We're all together in this, and we'll get through this one day at a time. So Major League Soccer, they were planning a comeback. But match gets postponed after positive test. So Toronto versus DC United, they clash in the back off due to the coronavirus positive. So there were a couple of players who ended up testing positive in this event as well. And so Major League Soccer, this is what happened. They announced that today's DC United and Toronto FC match has been postponed and will be rescheduled. MLS will announce details later today for the rescheduled match. Under the league's health and safety protocols, clubs are tested the day before each match. The results of yesterday's test, initial unconfirmed positive COVID-19 case for one player and an inconclusive test for another player. So a couple of players ended up getting hurt. They haven't announced exactly who those players were, but the match itself has been postponed. And I think it's going to be, again, I think that this is a tough challenge for a lot of these sports and for a lot of these teams and players. But I think this is one that we're all going to end up learning, and we're all going to end up experiencing and wondering how we're going to end up coping with this and how we're going to end up planning this ahead. But MLS, they're trying to get themselves back into the groove of things, of getting soccer back. But this is kind of a hard one. This is a hard one really to kind of, really get through with it, but at least it's postponed. It's not canceled. So at least they will make that game up one way or another. But hopefully, things go out smoothly, and I'm sure that they're probably going to put those players in quarantine, and we'll hope for the absolute best. And finally, Milwaukee Bucks is guard Kyle Korver. He made his decision. He wants to use Black Lives Matter on back of jersey as an easy one. And so this was the message that was sent from Corver. He said, I just think that in this moment in time, this is the message. Anything I would ever hope to convey on the back of a jersey is represented in these 3 words. And Kyle Korver, I will tell you, is a big time advocate as far as supporter. You know, he's the type of guy that, like, you know, for very rare people, thinks outside the box with certain things. And he's a big time advocate. He's a big time supporter as well. I love Kyle Korver. Great guy. And I think that, and this is a big time movement because, of course, we have the NBA putting Black Lives Matters on the court, and a lot of these things, and then, you know, wearing the t-shirts as well. It's a lot of stuff that's happening all around. But I think the more and more that we get the messages out there, and the more and more that all of this now starts to progress rather than what we had seen in the past month, there may be hope. There may be a sign of hope and a sign of motivation. And that's kind of something that we would draw our conclusions on with that in the near future. But for now, I mean, I understand this deal. I like it. And I think it makes a lot of sense, especially to someone like Kyle Korver, who, you know, is a big time advocate, and he's a big time supporter. It makes sense. It makes absolute sense. And I'm sure that hopefully this message gets out there, not even just to the organizations and the leagues, but even to society as a whole. And so I'm happy about this. I think this is a really, really good idea. And can't wait exactly for the NBA to get back on schedule. So there was your hot press. So coming up next here, I'm going to have my best for last here on this show. And I mentioned about this earlier about Patrick Mahomes' contract deal, because I think Patrick Mahomes, to me, is Kansas City football. He's very much Kansas City football. You know, and I think about this with the remaining, because there's 32 teams in the NFL. And I've only named one of them that I know. When I think of the organization, that's the player who I think of. So I'm going to give out my names of players who I think, the second I look at some of these organizations' logos, and what comes to mind with it. So you don't want to end up missing that here on the Snake Sports Talk Show. Alrighty, folks. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank all of you guys for joining here up on the show. I really, really do appreciate it. I hope all of you guys are staying safe and healthy throughout this whole entire times of uncertainties, and hope you guys are having a great weekend as well and have a great week ahead as well. I will definitely have the show back on next Saturday at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern time. It's been so much fun. It's been such a packed show as well, and so glad to be here with all of you guys. So I'm announcing for my best for last here because we've seen this Patrick Mahomes deal go down. And again, I look at Patrick Mahomes, and he's the first thought when I think of the Kansas City Chiefs, because this is not taking away from guys like Len Dawson or Derek Thomas or Tony Gonzalez or a lot of these Kansas City players. But when you look at Patrick Mahomes and you just see the type of talent and the type of player he is, he's a once-in-a-generation type player. And he's very impactful for the team. As I've said, outside of Brady, there have only been, outside of Brady, he's the only quarterback in the first 2 years of full seasons that he's played where he's won a Super Bowl. He's been to 2 playoffs in a row, won those divisions, won a championship game, and then also wins the Super Bowl. And nobody else that I can think of has done that except for Tom Brady. And that's about it. And again, that's why I don't think anybody would ever be upset about this contract deal, because it's reasonable. Where do you ever get a player in a type of skill set and talent like that? Very, very rare. And I think Kansas City, they nailed it right out of the ballpark. I'm not sure how they're going to deal with this in the near future, but it's going to be something that's going to be very, very interesting to watch. So on my best for last, of the remaining 31 NFL teams, I'm going to end up giving out the first player that comes to mind to me when I think of these franchises, and kind of give you a breakdown on each of those players. So here we go. We'll start from A to Z from here. So the Arizona Cardinals. So the first person that I think of when I think of the Arizona Cardinals, I think of Larry Fitzgerald. I really, really do. I mean, the second would be Pat Tillman. Here's what's similar about Larry Fitzgerald and Pat Tillman. Both of them, I think, are great motivators. They're great leaders. And in a community base, Larry Fitzgerald has been big in community services. Pat Tillman served our country and was one of the biggest supporters, and one that we will never forget for the rest of our lives. But Larry Fitzgerald, to me, honestly, like, smart guy. I mean, he has a degree, and he's big on community. Very, very big on community. And you also look at him as a player, probably one of the most veteran, like the best veteran leadership type players at his position. And that's why I think with him and Kyler Murray, it works so well. I mean, you had Kyler Murray, you had Kurt Warner, so many other quarterbacks that have come and gone, and Carson Palmer, and he's worked with a lot of them. He's very, very, he's big with the programs, big time when it comes to certain plans that Arizona has in place. And I think Cliff Kingsbury is going to enjoy this, especially now having DeAndre Hopkins there next to him. Kyler Murray is just going to have the time of his life here this next season. And so I think it's going to be interesting. All right, the Atlanta Falcons. To me personally, when I think of Atlanta, I think of Michael Vick. I truly think of Michael Vick when I think of the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, to me, Michael Vick is very much Atlanta football. He's very much Atlanta Falcon football. Okay, when he broke out in the scene, he was a guy out of Virginia Tech, left-handed quarterback. Very rare do we ever see left-handed quarterbacks succeed in this league. But he was one that was very interesting because he had a mixture of arm strength, accuracy, very mobile, very agile, and knew exactly what to do with the football. But the only unfortunate part is, because we watch Lamar Jackson all the time, and when I look at this, Michael Vick, if he had a strong offensive line with Atlanta probably would have at least had a shot. But to me, Michael Vick was the type of player that I think was very impactful in this organization. There was not a talent like his. I mean, you could think of numerous quarterbacks who were mobile. Randall Cunningham, Steve Young. There were a lot of different quarterbacks all throughout the years that Michael Vick, that not compared like just the same similar talent, but somewhere along the lines where that was the kind of play style they had. And it was not big back then as it is now. And so Michael Vick, I thought, was the other cornerstone when it came to, a specialty type quarterback who knew how to throw and knew how to run. But he was Atlanta football to me. Baltimore Ravens. Oh, this is an easy one. I think it's Ray Lewis. Ray Lewis packs a punch on the defense. It doesn't even matter who it is that he comes across, but Ray Lewis was just that type of guy. Very hyper athletic, very strong, and he was very vocal, not just at his position, but even as a leader. He was very vocal to his team, and when he won his last Super Bowl in his last year with Baltimore, that was an icing on the cake. 2-time Super Bowl champ, and the amount of intensity that he gave to the defense and gave to the team as a whole, Ray Lewis was unbelievable. He was so much fun to watch that it was like, my God, like this guy was an animal, hyper athletic, very strong, and very vocal. And I don't think we'll ever have a defender much like him, especially in the linebacking position that Ray Lewis was capable of doing. Every task that was given to him, he executed. And that was how Baltimore was all about. Tough, grit football. And they're just a team that's in your face. They don't play nice. They're tough. And we all talked about the Oakland Raiders, and I'll tell you that in a little bit, but the Baltimore is probably the second coming of just a Raiders team that's tough, that's in your face, that doesn't play nice. So, Buffalo Bills. I'll be honest with you. Like when I think of Buffalo, I think of Jim Kelly. There are a couple of players there. Jim Kelly's one of them. Bruce Smith, Andre Reed. Because I just think about that team in the 90s. And Jim Kelly was the type of quarterback, very accurate, outside of guys like Dan Marino and Joe Montana and John Elway and a lot of these other quarterbacks that were in the league at that time. Jim Kelly was one that was under the radar. He was one that was a very underrated player. Well, the only unfortunate part for the Buffalo Bills of going to 4 Super Bowls and not winning one was a heartbreaker. It was one that really broke Buffalo fans' hearts. But Jim Kelly, when you think about it, his poise and his accuracy and the type of player that he was and the offense surrounded with him. He had a wide receiving core. He had a real good offensive line, and he even had a really good running back core. And so Jim Kelly, to me, I think fits Buffalo football. It's cold. Yes, it's cold. It's interesting, but I'm not saying their time is coming again, but I think that the way that things are built right now with Josh Allen and with how Sean McDermott has this thing, Buffalo may return to being a competitive team at some point. I'm not sure when, but I feel like the time is coming for them. But that's who I think of as Jim Kelly when I look at Buffalo. Carolina Panthers. I'll be honest, Steve Smith. If there's another guy that I think of, it's Julius Peppers. But Steve Smith, to me, when I look at Carolina, and look, I'm not taking this away from Cam. Okay, Cam Newton, we know, was Carolina football also. But if you had to look at very impactful player, Steve Smith was a type of wide receiver that knew how to get open. Now, there were a lot of complications in Carolina's organization. With the steroids, all sorts of stuff. It didn't look pretty for them. It did not look pretty for them whatsoever. And I think that, and how Steve Smith of like the type of wide receiver that he was, they were a pretty interesting and yet competitive team eventually when pieces started to kind of form up. So it was really, really good. But and Julius Peppers, to me, honestly, like, he was a very, very good defensive player, very tough. But I don't know. It's kind of neck and neck between Steve Smith and Julius Peppers. I'll be honest with you. But when I look at Cam Newton, I'm not taking anything away from him, but I just think with the amount of years that he spent in Carolina, yeah, he went to a Super Bowl, but so did Jake Delhomme, and so when I look at Carolina, I don't think too much of Cam, even though that Cam is an honorable mention to me, but I just don't think of Cam. I just think of Steve Smith. The Chicago Bears, Walter Payton. I mean, the only, big time Bear I can think of. I'm not taking it away from guys like Gale Sayers or Mike Ditka or either one of them. And Walter Payton, Man of the Year award. I mean, it's probably one of the most prestigious awards in the NFL. And the type of leadership, the type of services that he brought, Walter Payton was the man. And in Chicago, in a very prestigious organization, like, it fit the bill. He's very much Chicago football. Cincinnati Bengals. Let me just say, I think Chad Johnson. Okay, Chad Johnson, to me, fits the bill for Cincinnati Bengals football. I mean, he was a guy that was very comical, he was very athletic, not hyper athletic like I would think of a Ray Lewis, but he was very athletic. And he was a type of wide receiver that, the year when you had Carson Palmer and you had TJ Houshmandzadeh and you had a lot of these guys, like Chad Johnson was the type of player that was just always on the television, very entertaining. I mean, we all want to talk about Terrell Owens and all this other stuff, but Chad Johnson, to me, was a guy that was very comical. And I think, it's kind of interesting when you think of Cincinnati. Like, you wouldn't think so much of Cincinnati history, but to me, when I think of it, I think Chad Johnson really fits the bill when it comes to Cincinnati football. Cleveland Browns, Jim Brown. That's the only person that I can think of in my mind. Okay, Jim Brown, Mr. Brown himself. He's the only person that really fits the bill for this organization. And to be honest, outside of that, who is the other top player? Joe Thomas, an offensive tackle. I'm not taking anything away from him, but Cleveland, to me, has not had a history of really big time impactful players when it comes to offense, except for Jim Brown. That's it. Look, we may look 5 or 7 years from now when we look at Baker Mayfield and how this is going to build up, but Jim Brown, to me, fits the bill for Cleveland. He fits Cleveland. And he was the type of player that was the best running back in his era, that he couldn't even be stopped. And a lot of people still, to this day, respect him gratefully. The Dallas Cowboys. Oh, man. This is a tough one for me because there are so many numerous Dallas Cowboy players. But if I had to pick one, Troy Aikman. I think Troy Aikman, to me, was exactly the look of Dallas. Now, I'm not taking away from Emmitt Smith or Michael Irvin or Jimmy Johnson or any of that. But if you think of Troy Aikman, a quarterback who came out of college at UCLA, and not a lot of people really thought fond of Troy Aikman for a long time. But Troy was able to get this team in to the playoffs, win divisions, and win Super Bowls. But of course, when you look about it, when you look at him and Jimmy Johnson together, that was probably one of the best duos in the NFL. Probably one of the best Dallas Cowboy duos. I mean, not to take away from Tom Landry and Roger Staubach, but at least Dallas in their history, they had two of the best duos. But Jimmy Johnson was very interesting as a head coach, very, very smart, well-respected. And Troy Aikman, even to this day, is a very respected quarterback and was very much Dallas Cowboy type quarterback. He didn't care what the pressures were in the organization, even though Jerry Jones and the organization were known to be very, very pressurous to all of their players, especially the quarterback position. But he was a guy that toughened it out. He was a guy that got them into the playoffs and ended up winning playoff games and winning Super Bowls. So that's just the one person that comes to mind. The Denver Broncos, John Elway. John Elway, that's it. Look, I said this, earlier about Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes, but John Elway to me, and this is what I've said before, my pops, the only person he was not fond of was John Elway. As a diehard Raider fan, that's what they had to deal with against the Broncos. And John Elway coming into the scene out of Stanford, he was a very accurate quarterback. He had a lot of arm strength, and he was just a guy that was just full of talent. It was unfortunate. Yeah, he made it to the Super Bowl in his prime, but then eventually when things started to slow down, then things started to really kind of rally up. Not to say he was completely out of his prime, but it was just to a point where he was just kind of slowing down. But yet guys like Terrell Davis and Shannon Sharp and even Rod Smith, I mean, Denver had an interesting team, but to me, John Elway, even being a general manager of this organization, I mean, he fits the bill with Denver football, and he's exactly that look. Detroit Lions, what can I say? It's Barry Sanders. It's very much Barry Sanders here. I can't think of anybody else. I mean, you'd be lucky enough if you end up thinking about Matthew Stafford as being a face of Detroit football. But to me, Barry Sanders fits the bill. He was such a dangerous running back in the league, and there was nobody like Barry Sanders, except for guys like, you had Earl Campbell. You had a bunch of really, really good running backs back in that era. But Barry Sanders, to me, was the type of running back who was very quick, very elusive, and got himself out of positions that we just never seen. We just never really seen before. The Green Bay Packers, Brett Favre. My honorable mention will probably be Bart Starr, and eventually it'll be Aaron Rodgers. But if you think of Brett Favre, when he first came into the scene, yeah, he was drafted by the Atlanta Falcons and then eventually comes into Green Bay. But when you think of Green Bay football, because Green Bay is so old school, they're that country type organization that not like these big ones like Dallas or Los Angeles or New York. Green Bay is just an organization of their own. And Brett Favre brought a lot of grit. He brought a lot of toughness and was a guy that was not afraid to sling it. It didn't even matter how many picks he threw, but he was not afraid to sling it. He had probably one of the best arm strengths in the league amongst quarterback positions, and he very much fit the bill of Green Bay football. It's not to take away from Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron, in the last 2 years, has led the league in throwaways. He's protecting his quarterback rating, but at the same time, if you're not winning games, taking risks, to me, it's a change of scenery when it comes to guys that fit the bill for those organizations. The Houston Texans, I'll just say this, J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt, to me, is Texan football. A guy that's strong. You want to talk about also another hyper-athletic player? He's another one. He's another one that's hyper-athletic. The Watt family with him, Derek and T.J. Watt, these are both grown men. They are strong, agile, very hyper-athletic grown men. Okay, and they're all brothers who play in the league. But J.J. Watt is so impactful in this Houston organization, because if you have to think about it, so many times he's won Defensive Player of the Year, and he fit the bill of Houston Texan football. Like, just the guy, because Houston was so fresh since 2002. They had a bunch of players, like I'll mention Andre Johnson is a honorable mention at number 2. But J.J. Watt, to me, was very impactful, because watching him and how strong and how hyper-athletic that he was. I mean, there's nothing that takes this guy down. Nothing. And so I just truly think that, J.J. Watt, and I'm not sure how Houston is going to pan out throughout this whole thing, but J.J. Watt definitely fit the bill from here. Indianapolis, definitely Peyton Manning. And I still hear about this, about sometimes Peyton Manning in Denver, but honestly, Peyton in Indianapolis is why Indianapolis is shaped the way that they are. Honorable mentions: Johnny Unitas, Andrew Luck, Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne. There were so many really good players in Indianapolis's history. But Peyton Manning coming out of Tennessee, this guy was strong. He's a hard thrower of the football. Very, very smart when it came to playbooks, when it came to audibles. He was a mind reader. You know, when you watched him at quarterback, he always read the linebacker. What is the linebacker seeing in me that I got to see through him? And he'll point that out. That's why you always heard the shout outs of Omaha all the time, because he knows when linebackers are shaping up, where the mic is, and how the offensive line can be prepared for that. And Peyton was very, very smart quarterback. Okay, so we already covered the Chiefs. Now let's go to the Raiders. Oh, wait, the Jacksonville Jaguars. My bad. Jacksonville, honestly, I think of Maurice Jones-Drew. I think of Maurice Jones-Drew in this. And let me just tell you, I mean, this is a shout out for him, you know, because he's a really, really good NFL analyst as well. We talked before. It was such a great interview, and he's such a great guy. But Maurice Jones-Drew to me was Jacksonville. He was a guy that was very, it didn't matter what size he was. He was small, but man, he packed a punch. Very fast. It's a guy that came out of this league. I mean, you had Fred Taylor, who was also his secondary running back, but man, this guy knew how to run. And it to me personally, Maurice Jones-Drew, he was a type, he was a type guy. And unfortunately, in an organization that, I'll be honest, is not really well ran. But man, they had a really good running back there in that era. And Maurice Jones-Drew, very, very impactful. All right, now let's go to the Raiders. Oh man, to me, when I think of the Raiders, so many players. I'll have to go with Charles Woodson. I'm going to have to go with Charles Woodson in this one, because even though that there were so many Raider legends, I mean, it's an old school organization, very tough. You have to think of the head coaches they had: John Gruden, John Madden, and there were so many lists of players: Fred Biletnikoff, Jim Plunkett, Ken Stabler, Bo Jackson, Marcus Allen, Charles Woodson, Tim Brown. God, the list is long. The list is super long. And to me, I mean, when I watched Charles Woodson, he was a very, very defensive corner. He was a guy that just got all over everybody in the defense and was very defensive and just shut a lot of plays down when it came to the passing game. And so Charles Woodson was a fun player to watch, very tough, and that was what fit the bill about Oakland football. And now that they're here in Vegas and they're kind of changing a little bit of some things up, I mean, you may still have the same Raider football, but it's interesting. It's going to be different. It's going to be very interesting. The LA Chargers. I think, to me, it's LaDainian Tomlinson. My second best is going to be Junior Seau. But LaDainian Tomlinson, if you think about it, man, I used to love watching him play. Not only am I just a personal fan of the Chargers, but when I watch LaDainian Tomlinson run, it's like he knew exactly the gaps that were open on the offensive line, and he would take full advantage of it. That year in 2006, 2007, that was the greatest rushing year for LaDainian Tomlinson, leading the league in rushing touchdowns, setting a personal record for him. He was unstoppable. And it was unfortunate that the Chargers, because they really, really wanted to get into the Super Bowl with that core, but there were still some things that were missing in the organization. They haven't quite figured out. But I'm very excited for this year's team. And I think they might end up figuring out, hopefully, for this year. But we know that Patrick Mahomes is a tough threat. But I think the Chargers may have a chance. But to me personally, LaDainian Tomlinson was what fit Charger football. The LA Rams. Oh, man. I think of Eric Dickerson. I truly do think of Eric Dickerson. There are a couple of players, and look, come back to me in 7 years from now, and I may say Jared Goff. But Eric Dickerson, man, like you ever watch him on Undisputed? He's such a funny guy next to Shannon Sharp. He's such a funny guy, great guy. He's big on LA football. He's big on Rams football in particular. But he was a guy that was also in an era of running backs that was very impactful. You know, he was very, very impactful for the organization. And in an era where running backs did matter, like, he was strong and he was very agile with his feet. You know, and just the style. Here's what's funny. The style, that neck padding, those goggles that he wore, you know, in his helmet, you're like, man, like there would never be another running back much like him. You know, and very great guy. Very great guy. And now there may be a couple of honorable mentions like Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, Kurt Warner. You know, there were a lot of different Ram players, but I think if you come back to me 7 years from now, depending on how things go, I may say Jared Goff at some point. Miami Dolphins, Dan Marino. End of story. I mean, look, I loved the 72 Don Shula team, but if you had to look as far as individual player, Dan Marino was the man. Dan Marino came into this league, tough arm strength, very accurate of his passes. This was a quarterback class unlike any other. And Dan Marino was very much one of the best in that class. And he got to a Super Bowl. Now, the unfortunate part is there was no Super Bowl win, but if there's anybody that I can think of with talent like his, I mean, Dan Marino was unbelievable. And for other quarterbacks, like other honorable mentioning quarterbacks, at least to his caliber, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, like Dan Marino kind of influenced these types of quarterbacks. I'm not sure what may happen with Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or some of these young quarterbacks in the league now. But I think Dan Marino, when you look at ideal talent and you look at the way that he's played the game, like, he's Miami. He's definitely Miami football. He fits the bill. Minnesota, Randy Moss. Okay, I know with a lot of players like John Randall, and Randall Cunningham or Dante Culpepper, but Randy Moss was Minnesota football. Okay, he was a guy that was tall, lanky, athletic, very much a different type of talent we've all never seen at his position at wide receiver. Why do you think wide receivers sometimes when they make crazy plays, they're always on SC top 10? Well, it's because we watch Randy Moss all the time. Moss people. With his tall, lanky, athletic ability, he was just catching balls that we just were like, how did he get it? He was unstoppable. Very much an unstoppable wide receiver. And it was unfortunate that he doesn't have a Super Bowl ring. But man, he was great. He was great at his position, a talent unlike any other at wide receiver. Man, fun to watch. New England Patriots, this is a no-brainer. It's Tom Brady. Okay, Tom fits the bill for New England. He's the reason why New England is the way that they are. You can argue with him, between him and Bill Belichick, but they're the best duo ever in the NFL in history for 20 years in the making. Tom came in at a time where Drew Bledsoe was hurt, won a Super Bowl, and then eventually 4 more fit the bill, where, 5 more, I should say. 5 more fit the bill. And now New England is probably one of the most prestigious organizations running. But I'll be honest with you, this is a different look of the New England now. But Tom Brady, he fit the bill of New England football. Do your job. That's toughness. That's grit. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You just got to do your job. Play your game. That's what Tom expressed with New England. New Orleans, Drew Brees. Drew Brees fits New Orleans football. Okay, this is a guy who uplifted a city after Hurricane Katrina in 2006. And since then, it's always been, who dat? Who dat? Drew Brees fit the bill in this type of, organization, this style of play of football. And when they won the Super Bowl in 2009, Super Bowl 44, man, I was happy for Drew Brees. But I was also happy for New Orleans because New Orleans was so irrelevant all throughout the years. And finally, when they got to a point where they were starting to become competitive, it took the league by storm. Nobody saw that coming. And Drew Brees, I think, fit the bill and was the icing on the cake of exactly what New Orleans needed. And him and Sean Payton, they've been doing this thing for years. But they were very tough. I mean, I know with the whole bounty scandal and everything else with Jonathan Velman, so many others in the defensive core, but New Orleans was tough. New Orleans was a very, very interesting, stylish organization and type of football play that we've seen in the NFL. New York Giants, Lawrence Taylor. Okay, he was definitely New York Giant football. Okay, a guy that influenced a lot of big-time pass rushers, even in today's game. He's strong, agile. It just like you were the prey, and he was the hunter, and you were the prey. That was how Lawrence Taylor's game was. He was coming right at you in every degree. And man, it still is gruesome to this day. Every time when you watch the highlight of Joe Theismann, oh man, it's still gruesome to this day. But him, and I mean, there was no better defensive core than him and Harry Carson, at that time. Man, Lawrence Taylor was unbelievable. He was an animal. And for a lot of these pass rushers nowadays, I mean, when you look at the type of football they're playing now versus the type of football in his era, it's not even close. I mean, Lawrence Taylor knew how to get to the quarterback, and he knew how to get to the guy with the football, period. New York Jets, Joe Namath, Broadway Joe. He's the guy that just fits the bill of New York football, especially with the Jets. Look, this was a guy that before style became a big thing in the NFL, like he wore this big coat. He was known as Broadway Joe, and he kind of brought that swagger to the Jets. And I know that there are a couple of honorable mentions in Jets history, like Curtis Martin would be one of them. Darrelle Revis was another one that I think it was a big time hard player, knew how to play very defensively. He was a shutdown type guy. But Joe Namath, to me, like just as far as style and popularity, I got to go with him with that. Philadelphia. Whoo, this is going to be an interesting one because there are so many, in Philadelphia history. But if I have to think of Philadelphia Eagle football, I got to go with Donovan McNabb. I'm not taking anything away from Terrell Owens, but think about it. Terrell Owens played with San Francisco, goes to Philly, goes to Dallas. Like he had so many different moments in all those organizations that it's hard for me to even pinpoint just one. And so but to me, Donovan McNabb came into this league, and Andy Reid, again, best playmaker type coach. He didn't have the specialty quarterback, but Donovan McNabb was a real good quarterback. He was a guy that was accurate of the football. They got into the Super Bowl in 2005. And, for me, because he had some really, really good players, Brian Westbrook, Terrell Owens, lots of good players. And Donovan McNabb, just the way that he elevated his presence and the type of quarterback and style he was very fun to watch. He was very fun to watch, not super impactful, like not like a Patrick Mahomes with Andy Reid now, but this was kind of just the start of something. And I think Donovan McNabb was really, really good. Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh, Lord. There's an entire list of it. If I have to think of Pittsburgh football, I got to go with Jerome Bettis. I know it might shock a lot of people. Again, bear with me for Pittsburgh Steelers fans because you have too many players, damn it. Like you've got Big Ben, you've got Terry Bradshaw, you got you got Franco Harris and Lynn Swan and Stallworth and Jack Lambert and Mean Joe. God. But Jerome Bettis, to me, like the bus, he was big. He was coming at you with everything he got. I mean, you look at, you think, Derrick Henry was surprising now. Like, Jerome Bettis was a whole different type of player. He was big. He was coming. He was busting right through the lines at any way to get first downs. And so, but again, there are so many honorable mentions in Pittsburgh's organization that I can't even keep count. It's ridiculous, but man, it's crazy. But I think he definitely fit the bill of Pittsburgh football. Pittsburgh is very tough. The steel curtain, and they're the guys that pack a punch, every single one of them, offensively and defensively. And there's so many of them to go around. San Francisco 49ers. Oh, definitely Joe Montana. That's no brainer. Joe Montana was very much a face of San Francisco. The relationship him and Bill Walsh had in that era of football, San Francisco was unstoppable. And Joe Montana elevated the quarterback position. We look at it now in this era and how much that Tom Brady has elevated. But in that era there, I mean, Joe Montana, Dan Marino, John Elway, all these quarterbacks at that time, there was nothing like Joe. Nothing like Joe. And Joe had an offensive line. He had weapons. He had all sorts of players. Roger Craig, Jerry Rice, Dwight Clark. And defensively, I used to love watching their defense. Ronnie Lott. They had so many really good players that it's undeniable that Joe Montana was face of San Francisco. Seattle Seahawks, Russell Wilson. I'm just going to come out and say that to you because Russell Wilson, to me, Russell Wilson is the reason why Seattle still has a franchise. He is. I don't think anybody realizes how impactful Russell Wilson really is. Look, in Seattle's history, what were some numerous players I know? Matt Hasselbeck, Sean Alexander, Steve Largent, Cortez Kennedy. That's it. And a lot of people may think Richard Sherman or a lot of the Legion of Boom, but really it was always been Russell Wilson. He's never been hurt. He's so agile and he's very mobile as a quarterback. And he just does things that is, words can't describe. We look at Patrick Mahomes right now, but Russell Wilson, when he came into the league, it didn't even matter by his size, but his play style was unbelievable. And one that very much is a face of a franchise. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm going to go with Warren Sapp on this one because Tampa, there were numerous players. John Lynch, Cadillac Williams. There was not a whole lot of very historical Tampa Bay players all throughout the years of the franchise. But Warren Sapp was the type of guy that bust through offensive lines, got to the quarterback, got to the running back. He got to anybody who had the football in his hands. And he was a big guy. He was a very big guy. Funny too, very comical. And he's the type of guy that if you get on his funny side, you're good. But if you're out on the offense and you're playing against Warren Sapp, you better be careful because he's coming at you with anything he's got. Tennessee Titans. Oh, man. This is going to be interesting for me, but I mean, when you think of Tennessee and you think of, before then it was the Houston Oilers. When I think of Titan football, shoot, you know what? I'm going to have to go with Steve McNair in Tennessee. I'll be honest. I will be honest. to me, Steve McNair, and God rest his soul, but Steve McNair was a really good quarterback, and one that I think really fit Tennessee. And Tennessee was the type of organization that fresh, brand new, moved out of Houston, and there were honorable mentions like Warren Moon. But Warren Moon, like, think about it. It was Houston Oilers, and even Eddie George in Tennessee. Now, again, come 5-7 years, I might say Derrick Henry. But to me, or even in the Houston Oilers, like Earl Campbell, there were a couple of them. But Tennessee, I mean, there was not so much history because it was a different franchise that just changed over from Houston to Tennessee. But Steve McNair to me was a real good quarterback, impactful in the organization as far as stamping themselves on the map of being a playoff team. And finally, the Washington Redskins, which now we're going to have a name change on this. But to me, if I had to think of a player, it's going to be Doug Williams. Doug Williams was a guy that very impactful quarterback. They've won 4 Super Bowls, and Washington was a type of team that was middle of the pack. They were such an interesting team, but Doug Williams, you could hear him from afar. And it's funny because Peyton has a show amongst quarterbacks, and Doug Williams, to me, he even mentioned it. He's very loud, and Doug Williams was very accurate of the football. He was definitely the type of guy that offenses changed, but his gameplay style did not. And Doug Williams was very impactful for that. And the only person in Washington history who was a very not just an impactful quarterback, but just an impactful player in the organization as a whole. And there were numerous players who've come through the organization, but there isn't anyone that I can think of except for him. So that does it there for all the 32 teams. For teams that I can think of when I start looking at their logo, and I can just think of the first player off the top of my mind. So thank you all for watching here. Stay tuned next weekend at 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. Eastern time on Saturday. We'll start to talk a little bit more. But I'm very, very glad you guys have been here on the show. This is the Snake. Jake the Snake signing off here on the Snake Sports Talk Show. Have a great weekend and have a great week, everyone.